AITA for telling my GF that her tradwife ambitions is disrespectful to me in our relationship? When I first met her, it felt like the stars aligned. I had just graduated with my undergrad degree, and she was beginning college a little later than most. We met at a mutual friend's party, and things just clicked. She was this blend of energy and optimism, and I was drawn to her. She had this excitement about life that made everything feel a little brighter. And in those early days, I felt lucky to be part of it. I had a stable job lined up, a car, and enough savings to feel secure. She didn't have much at the time. No car, no real income, just the determination to get through college and make something of herself. It didn't bother me. I didn't care that I was the one driving us everywhere or footing the bill for dinner. I was happy to do it because I loved her, and in those moments, I believed she appreciated it. Maybe it made me feel good about myself, too. Being the one who could provide, who could make her life easier. We've been together for over 2 years now, and I can't deny that I've enjoyed most of it. She brought light into my life, and I got to spoil her a little. It felt nice, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I've always liked doing things for her, surprising her with gifts, taking her on trips, or buying little things that I knew would make her smile. It's just who I am. I was raised to treat the people I care about with love. And for me, part of that love was expressed through these small gestures. But recently, things have shifted, and not in a good way. It all started when she finally got a car. Her uncle and parents helped her out, and I was genuinely excited for her. After 2 years of doing all the driving, it felt like we could finally balance things out. I wouldn't have to constantly drive back and forth between her place and mine, burning gas and wasting hours on the road. I thought maybe now she could come to me, and it would make things easier. But that wasn't what she had in mind. I remember mentioning how nice it would be for her to drive to my place now that she had a car. And she just looked at me like I was crazy. No, she said matter-of-factly. I don't want to waste miles. I was floored. Waste miles? Wasn't that the point of having a car? I've been driving to see her for over 2 years. Never once complaining about gas, wear and tear, or the time it took out of my day. And now, suddenly, when the situation could be reciprocated, she just refused. When I pushed back, she practically shrugged me off, saying, "You'll be fine, you make good money, so you can replace your car when it wears out." It hit me hard. There was something so dismissive about the way she said it. It was as if all the driving, all the expenses I'd taken on, meant nothing because I could afford it. As if my feelings didn't factor into the equation at all. It wasn't about the money, though, it was about the lack of consideration. From that moment, something shifted inside me. I felt a cold distance between us. Like I was seeing things differently for the first time. I brushed it off, trying not to dwell on it too much. But the truth was, it hurt. I started paying closer attention to the little things after that. She never hesitated to let me cover the bills, whether it was dinner, movies, or a weekend getaway. I didn't mind it at first. But after the whole car situation, it felt like something else. It started feeling less like a partnership and more like I was her personal bank account. And then came the TikTok. That's when everything really started to unravel. She sent me this video about tradwives, women who take pride in being homemakers while their husbands work and provide for everything. It wasn't a bad video, it was beautifully shot. And I'll admit, the aesthetic was nice. But when I mentioned how those videos often paint an unrealistic picture, she fired back with, "Women are just marrying the wrong men." The words stung. It wasn't just an offhanded comment. It felt like a direct hit to everything I'd been doing for her. For 2 years, I'd been supporting her without asking for anything in return. And here she was, implying that I wasn't enough. That if I couldn't or wouldn't support her entirely, she might end up with someone else who would. That night, I lay awake thinking about our relationship, wondering if this was the first time I'd noticed her unrealistic expectations, or if I'd been ignoring them all along. It wasn't just the car, the gifts, or the bills. It was the way she viewed our future. She didn't want to work, even after finishing her degree. She wanted to live a life where I paid all the bills, and she could focus on her passions, whatever they were. And I was starting to feel used. I realized, as much as I cared for her, there was a deep disconnect between what we wanted from life. That's when the real conflict began. And once it started, it felt like there was no way to stop it. It all started with a TikTok. It seemed harmless at first, just one of those aesthetic videos of a young woman Probably in her mid-20s. Living what the internet calls the tradwife lifestyle. You know the type. Perfectly arranged flowers. A spotless home. Fresh baked bread cooling on the counter. And a husband coming home to a hot meal every night. It was all so neatly wrapped in nostalgia and domestic bliss. As if the 1950s had made a stylish comeback. Minus the glaring inequalities of the era. She sent it to me with a heart emoji. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, people send random videos all the time. And I've always known she's got a thing for vintage aesthetics. But when I casually mentioned that while the video looked nice, it was kind of unrealistic for most people. That's when things started to go downhill. Her response was quick. Almost too quick. Like she'd been waiting for an opportunity to say it. Women are just marrying the wrong men. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of how to react. It felt like an accusation. Like she was implying that if I couldn't provide her with that exact lifestyle, then maybe I was the wrong man. My stomach twisted as I thought back to all the times I'd gone out of my way to make sure she was comfortable. To pay for things without question. To support her in any way I could. I texted back something along the lines of, "That's not really fair. Those videos paint a very idealized picture that most people can't achieve. Life isn't always that simple." She replied, "If a man really loves a woman, he'll make sure she never has to work." That hit me like a brick. I sat there for a few moments, rereading the text. I could feel my pulse quicken. Not out of anger yet, but out of disbelief. Where was this coming from? I had always been supportive of her goals, even if they were a little hazy at times, and I thought we were working towards something together. But this was something else entirely. It wasn't about love, it was about an expectation that seemed to come out of nowhere. I tried to keep calm and asked her, "Do you really feel that way? That I should be the only one working while you stay home? Even if we don't have kids?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "A man should take care of his woman. And if he can't, what's the point? I'm scared for our future if you won't do that for me." Her words left me floored. I didn't know how to respond. Here I was, 2 years deep into a relationship where I thought we were equals. Where I was already doing more than my fair share, and suddenly, she was telling me that wasn't enough. She wanted me to support her fully. Financially and emotionally. While she stayed home and pursued, well, I wasn't exactly sure what. She wasn't even talking about being a stay-at-home mom, which I've always supported for couples who want that. She was talking about being a stay-at-home girlfriend or, eventually, wife. Someone who wouldn't work, who would just live this curated life at home while I brought in the money. It felt more like a fantasy than a partnership. I asked her, trying to keep my voice steady, "And what about me? What about us working together? What about building something as a team?" She shrugged it off. "A woman should never pay anything for a man. It's just how things should be." I was stunned. I had no idea where this mentality had come from. When we first got together, we never really talked about money in this way. I thought we were on the same page, two people working hard to build a life together, supporting each other along the way. But now, it felt like all the effort I'd put into our relationship was being disregarded. Suddenly, it wasn't enough that I'd paid for everything up until now or that I'd driven across town multiple times a week to see her. Now, I wasn't just her partner, I was expected to be her provider. Her words stung, especially because I had worked so hard to make sure she was comfortable. I thought about all the times I'd gone out of my way to make her happy, the gifts, the dinners, the trips. Never once did I ask for anything in return. But now, it was as if all of that wasn't enough. She wanted more. She wanted everything. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm not sure I can promise that kind of life. I'm still building my career. I'm not a millionaire, and I might never be. But I'll always work hard. And I'll always support you in whatever way I can." Her response was cold. "Then maybe I should find someone who can give me what I want." That's when I felt the anger bubbling up. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about respect. I had given so much of myself to this relationship. And now she was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that it didn't matter. That unless I could fully support her, I wasn't enough. The worst part was, I knew where she was getting these ideas from. Her mother had always reinforced this mindset, telling her she deserved a man who could take care of her, and that she shouldn't settle for anything less. I had tried to brush off those comments in the past, chalking it up to generational differences. But now it was clear that her mother's influence was strong. I felt trapped between what I thought our relationship was and what it had apparently become. She didn't just want love and partnership, she wanted security. And not the kind that came from emotional support. She wanted financial security. And if I couldn't provide it, she'd look elsewhere. I realized then that this wasn't just a disagreement. This was a fundamental difference in how we viewed our future. I wanted a partner, someone who would work with me to build a life together. She wanted someone to take care of her, to provide everything while she sat back and enjoyed the ride. I knew that if we didn't resolve this, our relationship was in serious trouble. But how do you resolve something like this when the expectations are so wildly different? When one person wants to build a future together and the other just wants to be taken care of. I felt the weight of it all crashing down on me. And for the first time in our relationship, I wasn't sure if we could make it through. After that conversation, something between us shifted. I felt it every time we talked. And especially when we were together. It was like this unspoken tension, hanging in the air, waiting to be addressed but never fully confronted. We both danced around the issue, pretending like everything was fine. But deep down I knew things weren't the same. I think she knew it too. It wasn't just about the TikTok or the car or even the expectations she had laid out for our future. It was about the way she saw me, the way she saw our relationship. Her comment about finding someone else, someone who could give her everything she wanted, kept playing in my head. On repeat. It wasn't something you just brushed off. It dug under my skin and made me question everything. For 2 years, I had given so much of myself to her. I had made sacrifices, both big and small, to keep her happy, to make our relationship work. I was the one putting in the effort, planning our dates, paying for everything, and doing the driving. It wasn't that I resented it at first, I actually enjoyed being able to provide for her. But after that conversation, I started questioning whether she truly appreciated any of it, or if she just saw it as my duty. I tried to move past it, to remind myself why I fell in love with her in the first place. She was still the same woman I had been crazy about for the past 2 years. The one who could make me laugh with just a look. Who brought an undeniable spark to my life. But now, that spark was overshadowed by the growing realization that maybe she didn't love me for who I was. Maybe she loved me for what I could do for her. The worst part was, I didn't know how to bring it up again without causing another fight. Every time I tried, she'd shut it down, saying I was overreacting or taking things too personally. She'd act like her expectations were completely normal, like it was perfectly reasonable to demand that I take on full financial responsibility for her, even without kids in the picture. I remember one night, not long after that initial conversation, we were out at dinner, one of our favorite spots, a little Italian place we'd been going to since we started dating. It should have been a nice evening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She was talking about her day, telling me about a class she was struggling with. And all I could think about was how this didn't feel like the partnership I had always envisioned for myself. She was so disconnected from reality, from the pressures of building a life together. It was like she didn't understand the weight of what she was asking for, how much responsibility comes with being the sole provider in a relationship. I wanted to tell her, to explain that I couldn't be the man she envisioned, not because I didn't want to, but because it wasn't realistic. But instead, I stayed quiet. I paid for dinner, just like I always did, and drove her home, trying to ignore the nagging thoughts in the back of my mind. The next day, we had another conversation that pushed me closer to the edge. She called me in the middle of the day, excited about some outfit she had seen online. She wanted me to buy it for her. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. I liked getting her things, making her feel special, but after everything that had been said, this request felt different. It felt transactional. Like I was just a means to an end. I asked her, casually, "Don't you think you could buy it yourself? You've got some money saved up." Her response was immediate, "But why would I spend my money when you can get it for me?" I went quiet. It wasn't the first time she had said something like that. But this time, it hit differently. It wasn't just about a dress or a pair of shoes. It was about the entire dynamic of our relationship. She had come to expect that I would take care of everything. And when I didn't, it was like I had failed in some way. I pushed back, gently at first. "I don't mind treating you. But I feel like this is becoming a pattern. You don't even consider buying things for yourself anymore. It's always me." She laughed, like I had said something silly. "That's because I'm your girlfriend. You're supposed to take care of me." I didn't know what to say. I had always been okay with supporting her. But it was starting to feel less like an act of love and more like a requirement. I felt like I was being used. Not for who I was, but for what I could provide. I don't know if this is sustainable. I finally said, my voice low. I don't mind helping out, but I feel like you're expecting too much from me. She got defensive, as I knew she would. What do you mean, expecting too much? All I'm asking for is a little help. But it wasn't just a little help. It was everything. She wanted me to cover every expense, every meal, every outing, and now, every item of clothing she wanted. And when I didn't immediately agree, I became the bad guy. It was starting to feel suffocating. I tried to explain how I felt. That it wasn't about the money, but about the lack of balance. I told her I wanted a partner. Someone who would work with me to build a future. Not someone who saw me as a walking wallet. She didn't take it well. So now I'm a gold digger? Is that what you're saying? I tried to reassure her that wasn't what I meant. But the damage was done. She was angry, and I was exhausted from trying to make her see things from my perspective. That night, I realized that this wasn't going to be an easy fix. It wasn't something we could just talk through and move past. This was a fundamental difference in how we saw our relationship, and it was tearing us apart. For the first time, I started to wonder if we were even compatible anymore. If I could really spend the rest of my life with someone who didn't see me as a partner, but as a provider. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money, it was about respect. And I wasn't sure I felt respected anymore. The more time passed, the worse things got between us. It wasn't always obvious, there were still moments when we laughed together or had fun. Like nothing had changed, but beneath the surface, I could feel the cracks widening. Every little thing that had once been easy and carefree between us now carried this weight. Like we were both tiptoeing around the inevitable. We still saw each other on weekends. Like we always had, but the excitement I used to feel when I'd pick her up wasn't there anymore. Instead of being happy to see her, I'd find myself dreading the small, subtle jabs she'd throw at me about how I wasn't doing enough. They weren't outright insults, but they were always there, lingering in the background. One weekend, she made another offhand comment while we were out shopping. She saw a designer bag in a window and practically lit up with excitement. "I've always wanted one of those," she said, looking at me expectantly. I knew where this was going. She wasn't just admiring the bag, she wanted me to buy it for her. And normally, I might have, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't bring myself to just keep spending money like it was nothing. I'd been paying for everything for 2 years. And now she wanted me to drop a ridiculous amount of money on a bag. Without even considering what that meant for me financially. "I'm not sure I can afford that right now," I told her, trying to be honest without making it a big deal. Her face fell immediately. "You're really not going to get it for me?" "It's not about that," I tried to explain. "I just think we should be more practical. We've got other things to think about, our future. Maybe getting a place together one day. I can't just keep buying expensive things all the time." She didn't say anything for a few minutes, but I could tell she was pissed. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. "You know, other guys wouldn't have a problem with this. They'd want to spoil their girlfriend." That hit me hard. It was the same thing she'd said before, that if I couldn't give her everything she wanted, she could find someone else who would. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to argue, but I couldn't just let it slide either. "I've been doing everything I can to make you happy," I said, my voice low but firm. "I've paid for everything. I've driven all over to see you. And I've never once complained. But I can't keep up with these expectations. I'm not made of money." She crossed her arms, clearly frustrated. "It's not about the money. It's about the effort. You just don't want to put in the effort anymore." I was stunned. Effort? After everything I'd done for her. She thought I wasn't putting in enough effort? It was like she didn't even see how hard I'd been working to keep this relationship afloat. How much I'd sacrificed to make sure she was happy. And now, because I wouldn't buy her a bag, she thought I was giving up. "I've been putting in the effort for 2 years," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've done everything I can to make this work. But it feels like nothing I do is enough for you. You keep expecting more and more. And I'm starting to think that no matter what I do, you're never going to be satisfied." She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I shot back. "You keep telling me how I'm not doing enough. How you need more from me. But what about me? When have you ever asked what I need? When have you ever offered to help me out or support me? It's always about what I can give you. Never the other way around." She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she just stood there, looking hurt and angry, like I was the one who had wronged her. And maybe, in her mind, I had. Maybe she really did believe that a man should provide everything for a woman. No questions asked. But that wasn't what I had signed up for. I wanted a partner. Someone who would build a life with me. Not someone who saw me as a bank account. After a few moments of tense silence, she finally spoke. I thought you loved me. I do love you, I said, feeling the weight of those words. But I need to feel like this is a partnership. I can't be the only one carrying the weight. She didn't respond, just turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the street, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I watched her disappear into the crowd, my heart sinking. I knew this conversation wasn't over, it couldn't be. But I didn't know how to fix it, or if it even could be fixed. The rest of the weekend was tense. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was only about surface-level things, what to eat, where to go. The deeper issues were still there, simmering just beneath the surface. But neither of us wanted to acknowledge them. It was like we were both too afraid to say what we were really thinking. Too scared to confront the truth of what was happening between us. On Sunday, when I dropped her off at her apartment, she gave me a half-hearted kiss and said she'd talk to me later. I could tell she was still angry, and I wasn't sure if she'd actually call or if she just needed some space. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. I kept replaying our conversation over and over again, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. Was I being unreasonable? Was I really not putting in enough effort? Or was she asking for too much? I knew I couldn't keep going like this. Something had to change. Either we needed to have a serious conversation about our future, or we were going to end up drifting apart, slowly but surely. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe we were already too far gone. Maybe we were just too different, with expectations that were never going to align. And maybe, no matter how much we loved each other, love wasn't always enough. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew deep down that we were on the brink of something irreversible. And I wasn't sure if either of us had the strength to pull us back from the edge. A week passed after that argument, and things didn't improve. If anything, they got worse. The tension between us grew heavier, lingering in every conversation, every interaction. It was like a weight neither of us knew how to carry, but also didn't know how to set down. I hadn't heard from her much after I dropped her off that Sunday. She sent a few texts here and there, but nothing substantial, mostly just short, impersonal messages like, "Hope your day's going well," or "Good night." I responded, trying to keep things normal, but I could feel the distance growing. There was an unspoken chasm between us now, one I wasn't sure we could bridge. On Friday, I texted her, asking if we were still hanging out that weekend. She replied with a vague, "Maybe. I'll let you know." That was odd. Normally, she'd be excited to see me. Normally, we'd already have plans made by midweek. This time, though, she didn't seem to care. I spent the entire evening waiting for her text. And when she finally messaged me late that night, it was just to say she was tired and would catch up with me tomorrow. Tomorrow came, and still, nothing. By now, I was feeling something that bordered on dread. It wasn't just that we were fighting, it was that she didn't seem to want to fix it. Every time I tried to bring up what was bothering me, she dismissed it or redirected the conversation. She didn't want to talk about the issues between us, and I didn't know how to make her see that we couldn't just ignore them. Saturday afternoon, I decided to stop by her place unannounced. I wasn't sure if it was the right move, but I needed to see her, to figure out where we stood. When I got there, her car was in the driveway, so I knocked on the door, hoping she'd be happy to see me. When she opened the door, her expression said everything I needed to know. She wasn't expecting me, and she didn't look pleased that I had shown up. Her eyes flicked over me, like I was an inconvenience. "Oh," she said, barely opening the door. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "But I figured we should talk." She didn't move to let me in, just stood there in the doorway, her hand resting on the doorframe like a barrier between us. "Talk about what?" I raised an eyebrow, taken aback. "About us. About what's been going on." She sighed, looking down at her feet. "I'm really tired right now. Can we not do this today?" That was it. That was the moment I realized she wasn't going to face the problems in our relationship. She wasn't interested in fixing things, in working through the tension that had built up between us. She just wanted to avoid it. To push it aside like it didn't matter. No, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. We can't just keep putting this off. We need to talk. She crossed her arms, leaning against the door. Fine, talk. The way she said it, with so little care, made my stomach twist. I had come here expecting a conversation, a real one, where we could hash out everything that had been weighing us down. But now, it was clear that she didn't want to engage. She didn't want to meet me halfway. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. I feel like we're not on the same page anymore. Like I'm putting in all this effort, but it's not being reciprocated. You're expecting more and more from me, but you don't seem to care about what I need. She rolled her eyes. Is this about money again? I told you. I don't understand why it's such a big deal. You're the one who's always saying you want to take care of me. To make me happy. I do want to make you happy, I said, frustration seeping into my voice. But I also need to feel like we're equals in this relationship. I can't keep giving and giving while you take and expect more. She didn't respond at first. Just looked at me with this annoyed expression, like I was wasting her time. And then she said it. The words that broke whatever hope I had left. Maybe we're just not right for each other. It hit me like a punch to the gut. For months, I had been trying to salvage this relationship, trying to find a way to make things work. And now, with one sentence, she was willing to throw it all away. You really think that? I asked, my voice low, struggling to keep the hurt from spilling over. She shrugged. I don't know. Maybe. I just feel like we want different things. There it was. The truth I had been trying to ignore for months. We did want different things. She wanted a life where I provided everything, where I paid all the bills and took care of her while she enjoyed the luxury of not having to worry about anything. And me? I wanted a partner. I wanted someone who would meet me halfway, who would contribute to our future together, not just sit back and let me do all the work. I realized, standing there on her doorstep, that we had never been on the same page. Not really. And as much as it hurt, I had to accept that maybe we never would be. I guess you're right, I said quietly, the words heavy on my tongue. Maybe we're not right for each other. For a moment, she looked surprised, like she hadn't expected me to agree with her. But then, she nodded. Yeah, maybe. We stood there in silence, the weight of those words settling between us. There was nothing left to say. We both knew it was over, even if neither of us wanted to admit it out loud. I should go, I said finally, turning to leave. She didn't stop me. She didn't say anything at all. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness, because I had loved her, really loved her, and I had wanted so badly for this to work. But relief, too, because now I didn't have to keep pretending. I didn't have to keep fighting for a relationship that wasn't worth saving. It wasn't until I was halfway home that the full weight of the breakup hit me. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I let myself feel the hurt, the disappointment, the loss. But even through the pain, I knew I had made the right decision. We had been holding onto something that wasn't real, something that was built on expectations and illusions instead of love and respect. And now, finally, I was free from it. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The first few days after the breakup were a blur. I tried to focus on work, on keeping busy, but my mind kept drifting back to her. It was strange to not have her around, to not be planning our next weekend together or hearing her voice every night before bed. For 2 years, she had been a constant part of my life, and now she was just gone. The absence was unsettling, but as the days passed, I began to settle into a new routine. I started spending more time with my friends, going out more often, rediscovering parts of my life I hadn't paid much attention to when I was so focused on our relationship. I even started going for morning runs again, something I used to love before I became too preoccupied with keeping her happy. It was like I was reconnecting with parts of myself I had forgotten existed. One day, about a week after we ended things, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. Hey, hope you're doing okay. I stared at the message for a while, unsure of how to respond, or if I even wanted to. What was there to say? That I was fine? That I wasn't? That I missed her? Or maybe that I didn't? I wasn't even sure how I felt yet. And I wasn't ready to dive back into those emotions just because she had decided to reach out. I left the message unanswered. For the next few days, I threw myself into work even more. I made a point to avoid places we used to go together. And I stayed off social media as much as possible. I didn't need the constant reminder of her life without me. Or of her moving on. Whether she was or wasn't. I didn't want to know. I needed space from her, space from us. A few nights later, I met up with some old college friends for drinks. It was the first time in a long while that I'd been out without her on my mind. We laughed, reminisced, and for a few hours, I didn't think about the breakup at all. But as I sat there, nursing my drink and listening to my friends joke around, I realized how different things felt. I wasn't worried about what time I'd get home or whether she would call me to ask where I was. I wasn't juggling the stress of trying to balance everything in my life while also keeping her satisfied. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't weighed down by the pressure of making someone else happy. And it hit me, in that moment, that maybe I had been sacrificing too much of myself to keep her content. Maybe I had lost sight of what I needed, what I wanted, in the process of trying to fulfill her every desire. A few days later, I was sorting through some old photos on my phone when I stumbled across a picture of the two of us from one of our weekend trips. We looked happy. I remembered that trip. How excited we had been to explore a new city together. How everything had felt so simple and effortless back then. But looking at the picture now, it felt like a different lifetime. A different version of me. A version that had been so consumed with making sure she was happy that I had forgotten to check in with myself. I deleted the photo. It wasn't about erasing her from my life, but about letting go of the parts of me that had been too focused on someone else's happiness. I had given so much of myself to that relationship. And now, I needed to reclaim some of that energy for me. I needed to stop trying to fix everything. Stop trying to meet expectations that were never mine to meet in the first place. In the weeks that followed, I began to reflect more on our relationship. I saw the cracks that had been there all along. The little things I had ignored or brushed aside because I didn't want to admit they were problems. Her expectations, her demands, her constant need for more. I had convinced myself that if I just tried harder, if I just gave her more, things would get better. But the truth was, no matter how much I gave, it was never going to be enough. Not for her, not for the kind of life she wanted. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I wasn't even sad. Really, I understood now that we were just different people, with different visions for the future. She wanted a life that I couldn't give her. And I wanted a relationship where I wasn't just a provider, but a partner. We were never going to meet in the middle, no matter how much we tried. And that was okay. As I started to move forward, I focused on the things that made me feel whole again. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in a while. I spent more time with my family. And I started setting new goals for myself, things I had put off while I was so wrapped up in our relationship. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments where I missed her, where I wondered what might have been if things had gone differently. But those moments became fewer and farther between. One afternoon, I got a text from her. She wanted to talk, said she missed me and was wondering if we could work things out. For a brief moment, I considered it. The familiar pull of our relationship was still there. And part of me missed the comfort of having her in my life. But then I remembered all the times I had bent over backward to make things work. All the times I had sacrificed my own needs for hers. And I knew, deep down, that going back wouldn't change anything. We would fall into the same patterns. And I would lose myself all over again. So, I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I chose to keep moving forward. I chose to focus on myself. On building a life that was mine. Not one defined by someone else's expectations. And slowly, but surely, I started to feel lighter. I started to feel like myself again. It wasn't until a month later that I felt like I had truly started to turn the corner. Life was beginning to feel normal again, if not better. More vibrant in a way I hadn't anticipated. I found joy in the little things again. From cooking breakfast in the quiet of the morning to spending time reading books I'd long since put aside. My relationship with myself had been neglected for too long, and now I was finally giving it the attention it deserved. But then, out of nowhere, she called. I wasn't expecting it. I had all but decided that our communication was over. And in truth, I wasn't waiting for it to start up again. Her name flashed across my phone screen as I sat at my desk one late afternoon. And for a moment, I considered ignoring it. I didn't need this. I didn't need to reopen old wounds or engage in a conversation that would likely leave me feeling worse. But something told me to pick up. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe I needed a sense of finality. Either way, I answered, keeping my tone neutral. calm. Hey. Her voice on the other end was quiet. Hi, I hope it's okay that I called. Yeah, it's fine. What's up? There was a pause. I could tell she was searching for the right words. Something that might ease into whatever it was she wanted to say. Finally, she spoke. I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About us. I said nothing. I had been thinking about us too. But I wasn't sure if we were thinking about the same things. She went on. I've realized that I took a lot for granted. You always did everything for me. And I didn't appreciate it the way I should have. I want you to know that I'm sorry for that. Her words hung in the air. And I felt a mix of emotions rise up. Part of me had wanted to hear this, an acknowledgement of the sacrifices I had made and the way I had been treated. But another part of me was wary. Apologies didn't change what had happened. And they certainly didn't undo the hurt I had carried for so long. I appreciate you saying that, I said slowly. But what's done is done. We can't go back and change it. I know, she replied, but I've been thinking, maybe we could start over. I've been reflecting on how much I miss you. And I think maybe things could be different now. This was the moment I had feared, the moment where she would ask me to go back. To try again. And as much as part of me missed her, as much as part of me remembered the good times we had shared, I knew in my heart that I couldn't go back. The person I had been in that relationship, the version of myself who had constantly tried to meet her needs at the expense of my own, was someone I no longer wanted to be. I don't think that's a good idea, I said gently. There was a long silence on the other end, and I could feel her disappointment. Why not? We had something good, we could try to fix it. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. We did have something good, but it wasn't enough. We weren't right for each other. Not in the way we needed to be. I spent too much time trying to be what you wanted, and I lost sight of what I needed. And I can't go back to that. I've changed, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wouldn't ask the same things of you anymore. I believe you, I replied. And I did. People could change, and maybe she had, but that didn't change the fact that we had outgrown each other. But even if that's true, I've changed too, and I'm in a different place now. I need something different. I could hear her take a shaky breath. And I knew this wasn't what she wanted to hear. But it was the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing firm in who I was. I wish things had turned out differently, she said after a while. Me too, I admitted, but sometimes, things don't work out for a reason. Another pause, longer this time. I guess I just wanted to hear you say it. Hear me say what? That it's really over. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, it is. We both sat in silence for a few more moments, letting the weight of those words settle. There was a sadness in the air, but there was also something else, relief. It was as if we were both finally letting go, acknowledging that what we had shared was over and that it was time to move on. Well, she said finally, her voice soft, I wish you the best. Same to you. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone, feeling lighter than I had in months. The conversation had been hard, but it was necessary. It was the closure I didn't know I needed. The final step in letting go of a relationship that had consumed me for far too long. I sat back in my chair, staring out the window as the sun dipped low in the sky. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was just at peace. I had finally said goodbye to a chapter of my life that had defined me for the past 2 years. And now, for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to start writing a new one. The future was mine to shape, and I was excited to see where it would take me. As the weeks passed, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The breakup, while difficult, had become a catalyst for reflection and growth. I was starting to feel like my old self again. But in a way, I was someone entirely new. Stronger, wiser. I was more aware of my needs, of my boundaries, and more committed to ensuring that they were respected moving forward. One of the first things I decided to do was focus on my own future, without considering someone else's vision for it. I had spent so much of the last 2 years worrying about what she wanted. What would make her happy? And now I had the freedom to ask myself the same questions. What did I want? What made me happy? It was a strange question to sit with at first. I had been so wrapped up in our relationship that my own desires and goals had become blurry. I had dreams, sure, but they always seemed secondary to making sure she was content. Now, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could take control of my own life and start steering it in the direction I wanted. One evening, I sat down with a notebook and started writing. I had no real plan. No idea what would come out of it. But I just let myself jot down whatever came to mind. What did I want to do? What had I put off while trying to keep someone else happy? The answers started to flow. Travel more. Learn a new skill. Take risks. Invest in the business and in myself. I even thought about going back to school for a while. Not because I needed another degree, but because I had always loved learning. The list wasn't groundbreaking, but it was mine. It was a reflection of who I was and who I wanted to become. And I hadn't felt this kind of clarity in a long time. Another realization hit me too. I didn't need anyone else to make those things happen. For so long, I had tied my future to someone else, believing that my happiness was contingent on a relationship, on making things work, but that wasn't true. I had the power to create the life I wanted, and I didn't need anyone else's approval or permission to do it. That thought gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't felt before. There was no rush to find a new relationship or fill the void left by the breakup. I was content with the idea of being alone for a while, of getting to know myself again. The idea of focusing on me, my career, my friendships, my hobbies, was exhilarating. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me because I realized I was already whole. One of the first concrete steps I took was planning a solo trip. I had always loved the idea of traveling alone, of getting lost in a new city with no agenda but my own. I had never done it because there was always someone else to consider. But now, I had no such obligations. I booked a trip to a small coastal town I'd always wanted to visit but never had the time for. It wasn't far, just a few hours' drive, but it felt symbolic. It was a chance to reconnect with myself and explore the world on my terms. The weeks leading up to the trip were filled with preparation and excitement. I didn't tell many people about it because it felt like something just for me. I started reading travel blogs, making notes about places I wanted to visit, hikes I wanted to take, and food I wanted to try. It was a small trip, but it felt monumental. It was the first step in reclaiming my future. On the day of the trip, I packed light and hit the road early in the morning. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow across the highway as I drove with the windows down. Music blaring, it felt liberating, like I was leaving behind the weight of the past and heading towards something new. Something undiscovered. When I arrived in the coastal town, it was even more beautiful than I had imagined. The ocean stretched out endlessly in front of me, and the air smelled of salt and adventure. I spent the first few hours just walking along the beach, letting the sound of the waves wash away the remnants of the breakup, of the old relationship that had consumed me for so long. I felt lighter with every step. The next few days were a mix of solitude and exploration. I hiked along cliffs overlooking the ocean, ate at small, family-owned restaurants, and spent time sitting in cafes, reading or just watching the world go by. I had conversations with strangers, learned bits and pieces about the town's history, and discovered things about myself in the quiet moments of reflection. I realized how much I enjoyed my own company, something I hadn't appreciated before. I wasn't lonely, I was at peace. I didn't need validation from anyone else to feel worthy or complete. I was enough on my own. By the time the trip came to an end, I felt like a new person. Or maybe, I was just reconnecting with the person I had always been but had lost sight of. Either way, I was ready to go back to my life with a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. When I got home, the first thing I did was hang up a photo I had taken of the ocean. It was a reminder of the journey I had been on, not just the trip, but the emotional journey of letting go and moving forward. I didn't need to carry the weight of the past anymore. I had my own path to follow, and I was excited to see where it would lead. The future felt wide open, and for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. It thrilled me. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength and the clarity to create the life I wanted, on my own terms. Months have passed since I made the decision to move on, both from the relationship and the life I thought I was supposed to live. It's funny how much can change in such a short amount of time. What once felt like a devastating loss turned out to be the beginning of something better, something I didn't even know I needed. My solo trip was just the start. After returning, I threw myself into everything I had been putting off. I began taking on more responsibilities in the family business, finding joy in the challenges and successes that came with it. It wasn't just a job to me anymore, it was a part of who I was. I also picked up new hobbies, things I'd always been interested in but never made time for. Rock climbing, photography, cooking. I allowed myself to explore without the pressure of someone else's expectations. One of the biggest changes came when I decided to fully embrace the idea of living for myself. I started setting boundaries, something I had struggled with for most of my life. Whether it was in friendships, family dynamics, or work, I stopped feeling guilty about prioritizing my own needs. It wasn't about being selfish, it was about self-respect. I learned that it was okay to say no. That it was okay to walk away from situations that didn't serve me or make me happy. Looking back, the relationship had taught me more than I realized at the time. It showed me how easily I could lose myself in someone else's world. How simple it was to let go of my own desires in the name of keeping the peace. But it also showed me the importance of listening to that little voice inside, the one that tells you when something isn't right. When you're not being true to yourself. I ignored that voice for too long. But I'm listening now. There's a certain clarity that comes with being alone. A kind of stillness that allows you to hear your own thoughts more clearly. I'm not rushing into anything new. I'm not looking for validation or love from someone else to fill a void. For the first time in my life, I feel whole on my own. My ex reached out a few times after our breakup. But I didn't engage. I knew that going back would only pull me into the same cycle of unfulfillment and frustration. I don't harbor any ill will toward her. Though, she was a part of my life. And in her own way, she helped me become who I am now. For that, I'm grateful. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about proving her wrong or proving myself right. It was about growth. It was about realizing that I deserve to be with someone who values me for who I am. Not what I can provide or how I can fit into their world. I want a partnership built on mutual respect, love, and understanding. And I know now that I can't settle for anything less. As for the future, I'm no longer worried about it. I've stopped planning everything down to the last detail. Instead, I'm letting life unfold naturally, trusting that I'll find my way as long as I stay true to myself. Whether that means traveling more, expanding the business, or even finding love again, I'm open to whatever comes next. I've learned that life doesn't always go according to plan. And that's okay. The detours are where the growth happens, where you discover what you're really made of. And now, as I stand on the brink of this new chapter, I feel nothing but excitement for what's to come. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, or even a few months ago. And for that, I'm thankful. I found strength in myself that I never knew existed. And I've learned that the most important relationship I'll ever have is the one I have with myself. So here's to the future. Here's to new beginnings, to unexpected journeys, and to living life on my own terms. I don't know exactly where I'm headed, but I do know one thing. I'm ready for whatever comes next. And this time, I'll be moving forward with confidence, knowing that I'm enough just as I am.